I still have traumatic flashbacks trying to understand Scarlet Witch vs Zatanna. This does not help that. Hey, what's going on, you guys? My name is the Raptor, and welcome back to another one of my Death Battle prediction videos. And next time on Death Battle, after Vader vs Obito, we have Jean Grey, aka the Phoenix, versus Rachel Roth, aka Raven. Now, I know some people really aren't too into this fight, and I apologize for the guys who aren't, I'm really sorry, but I'm not feeling too sorry for myself, because honestly, the more I think about this fight, the more hyped I get. I love both the X-Men and the Teen Titans, and this primarily stemmed from the older cartoons, which are still two of my favorite superhero cartoons of all time. They're seriously just amazing. Raven is probably my fourth favorite Titan after like Beast Boy and Kid Flash and Dick Grayson, if we're looking at like all-time members. And while Jean was never one of my favorite X-Men of all time, I did really enjoy the Phoenix Saga and a number of the Phoenix storylines that happened afterwards. So this episode is not just blasts from my past, it's also like, it represents things of what I'm into today, which I really like. I think that's really awesome. I could obviously point out that they've been using Marvel characters for like half the season's episodes so far, and that's not amazing, but these characters are still very distinct from one another, and I've been hyped for every single one of those announcements. So I feel like I really don't have anything to complain about right now. I'm just really excited to see where this episode goes. Now, if Death Battle doesn't veer too far off from what they said literally last year, they're probably going to compare the Phoenix very heavily to Scarlet Witch's chaos magic, as the Phoenix Force is literally the counterpart to that. Granted, they also brought up how Scarlet Witch was able to briefly erase the Phoenix Force from existence, but we still know that the Phoenix Force can tap into the Life Force and is responsible for maintaining cosmic and psionic order across the multiverse. The Phoenix has fought against some insanely powerful foes such as Galactus and Odin, and at her most powerful state, like the whole White Phoenix of the Crown stuff, she's been stated to be on par with a Cosmic Cube's power, and was even compared to the Beyonder in a few different kind of vague contexts, but even still, really powerful stuff. Also, Jean Grey is one of the quote-unquote perfect hosts that the Phoenix has embodied, meaning that she's basically able to use all of its power without sacrificing any mental stability. So Death Battle is probably not going to be using that as a weakness for her. Raven, on the other hand, I feel is the wild card here. It can really depend on how strong Death Battle believes Raven could be at her max, and to understand this, we have to make some assumptions that may or may not play out in my favor. For instance, I do believe they're going to be using the White Raven and Golden Raven states for her like they did in Twilight vs. Raven, just like also how I think they're going to be including the White Phoenix of the Crown for Jean, probably, but I do not believe that they're going to be using the Unkindness state for Raven. For one thing, I do not believe it's something she can just access whenever she wants to, and part of the equation I believe even just includes the power of Shazam, so I don't really think that's going to fly with Death Battle. And even still, Liam, the writer for this episode, I believe very recently said that he only includes Unkindness for Raven in Death Battle cast debates, which implies that they wouldn't actually be used in a Death Battle. If they do include it, because Death Battle can do whatever they want, so if they do actually include it, then I would just assume they would probably give it to Raven, because at that point she can just operate on a level that only some of the strongest characters in all of DC can do. I just assumed they would see that as more powerful. But, right now I'm going to assume they're not going to include it, but who knows. Now, Raven in her other forms is still really powerful. She's basically strong enough to free herself from Trigon's control completely, and pretty well solidly surpass him in overall power. Now, Trigon is, to put it lightly, really goddamn strong. He has destroyed countless universes, he's fought against numerous very strong magical enemies, including Dr. Fate, and he was even directly compared to the Spectre by the Monitors, who are essentially nigh omniscient. And Raven at her most powerful, even disregarding the Unkindness state, zooms past her father. She has weakened, beaten, and even I think presumably killed him at one point. And even beyond that, her soul self has acted as like a nexus for all souls that exist in all of existence, similar to how the Phoenix Force acts as the nexus for psionic energy in its multiverse. On top of that, she's even taken out multiple new gods at once, like dark side level shit with her golden form, and her soul self even withstood an attack from Zoriel wielding the flaming sword of of Michael, aka Lucifer's brother. So similar to how you could compare the Phoenix to the Beyonder in some contexts, you also have Raven tanking literal divine forces with similar leniency. Now, the reason why I'm going a bit more in detail with Raven's biggest feats than I am with Phoenix's is because, frankly, the Phoenix's power speaks for itself, whereas Raven's does not in the same way. The Phoenix has constantly been referred to as one of the strongest things that you can encounter in Marvel, and she has the feats to back that up, especially the White Phoenix of the Crown form. She's taken on some insanely powerful characters, godly entities for sure. But that kind of context, like how Marvel labels her, isn't really important here. Remember, Marvel has made a much bigger deal out of Scarlet Witch in her own stories than DC really ever did with Zatanna, but that didn't matter. Death Battle found that Zatanna had feats capable of contending with Wanda anyway, and there were other attributes that gave Zatanna the win. And I would also like to point out that in the results tab of the conclusion, Death Battle outright stated that both Scarlet Witch and Black Adam had more showings of their upper limits than their opponents, and that didn't end up meaning too much. So if Death Battle comes to the conclusion that Phoenix and Raven's best feats are around even, which I think they very well could given the feats that they have, just because Phoenix has more of those feats doesn't mean she automatically wins. So if they are close enough in power, what else can we look at? Well, again, Phoenix can tap into her full power without sacrificing mental stability. And while this wasn't always true for Raven, she has since gotten a lot better at controlling her emotions, and in turn now has enough experience accessing her full power just like Jean. I imagine they're around similar in speed. I don't see intelligence playing the biggest role either, or experience, as I just said. I imagine that if there's going to be any kind of deciding factor at this point, it would be, in their versatility, their arsenals, their abilities. And when comparing them, it's still really close, because of course it is, that's just these kinds of characters. But if I really had to give one character the edge here, it would very slightly be Raven. Now, don't get me wrong, if Death Battle comes to the conclusion that Phoenix is indeed stronger than Raven by enough of a margin, then I think Phoenix just wins regardless of Raven's arsenal. And to be perfectly frank, I think it's more likely that Death Battle will say that Phoenix is more powerful than Raven than the other way around. However, like I said, I still think it's most likely that Death Battle will say that they are comparable enough to each other in power, and that will force them to dig even deeper. And I think Raven's abilities might be enough to tip the scales. The biggest draw for the White Phoenix of the Crown is the extent of her reality warping powers, which essentially increase exponentially beyond her prior form, and on top of that, she is an incredibly powerful telepath who has energy blasts, energy absorption, transmutation, teleportation, time manipulation, and in some ways can transcend the life and death of others that it can easily affect. Raven, on the other hand, has many, although not all of those same abilities on a very similar scale, as well as influencing the minds and emotions of others, casting illusions, creating energy barriers, telekinesis, precognition, dimensional travel, astral projection, and more. And that ultimately gives her more options to pull out for a prolonged fight, and could theoretically buy her enough time to get an opening. And when comparing Jean and Raven side by side, there are some instances where Jean has not always performed as well. For instance, we know there are characters who have successfully fought back against her telepathic power and have even been able to look inside her own mind. Whereas again, Raven has essentially gained full protection over her own mind at this point and has successfully been able to empathically or consciously affect characters even as strong as her. We've also seen the Phoenix Force get disrupted or at least negatively affected by forces that are powerful but should still be weaker than itself, such as the Phoenix Buster. And yes, the Phoenix Buster is likely weaker than the Phoenix. If it wasn't, then it would have just destroyed it. And again, Raven's soul self has been able to take hits that stem from DC's Heaven and doesn't really have that same kind of spotty track record. Hell, the soul self can drain the power of who's ever caught in it, and to be honest, I'm not sure if we've ever directly seen the Phoenix counter something like that. Now, all of these notions may seem incredibly minuscule, and honestly, they really are. But I could see Death Battle trying to find the tiniest weaknesses of either of these characters to try to come to any sort of judgment, like they've done before. And if Phoenix and Raven really are, somewhat even in power, then those things can add up in the long run, especially in a prolonged fight. The only real problem with Raven's powers is that she can sometimes overexert or over-emote herself, you know, that kind of thing. But again, she's fought equally strong characters without having that issue nowadays, so I think at this point, it's not really fair to consider that a major problem for her. Ultimately, this feels very much like Scarlet Witch versus Zatanna territory. If Phoenix were to win, it would be because of her power. It would be because Death Battle would see her as a more powerful entity, which they very well could interpret. However, say what you will about Scarlet Witch versus Zatanna, but Death Battle was able to find the feats for both of the characters that put them around the same level of power. And it seems that Raven does have the feats and scaling to be on par with Phoenix's power, so I see no reason why Death Battle wouldn't find them or wouldn't include them. And at that point, I feel like Raven does have a more versatile arsenal that the Phoenix might not be able to fully defend against, at least over time, and it seems like she might have an ever so slightly better track record at her most powerful. It's hard to say, but again, we have to find the smallest differences at this point. And this is still all you know, going under the assumption that we're not including Unkindness Raven, which they may very well end up including despite what I've seen. So I can't believe I'm saying this, but I'm actually going to go with Raven. This is so weird to say because before I would have said Jean 100%, and I have a feeling I might be in the minority here, but like I said before, just because the Phoenix has been made a bigger deal of in her own stories more than Raven, doesn't mean that Raven doesn't have the feats needed to keep up anyway, or the capabilities to win. And I feel like she might. But with all that being said, I give you full permission to eat me alive, so let me know down in the comments below what you think. If you enjoyed this video though, be sure to give it a like, comment your comments down below, subscribe if you could too, that would be amazing. But no matter what you guys do, thank you all so much for watching, I really do appreciate it. Again, apologies to everyone who's not really that excited for this fight, but I personally am. I can't wait to see how Death Battle analyzes these characters. Let's see how much of this video ends up being accurate to that. So yeah, that's it for me. I will see all of you guys in the next video. Peace out.